Living in a conservative society, we're fully aware that there is a taboo against the mentions of sex, genitals like penis and vagina, condoms, and many other things of the same kind. You have seen the news headlines just now. Those terrible things happen because of the lack of knowledge and awareness about sex, as well as consent and boundaries. What if I told you that integrating sex education as a standalone subject rather than a small, often undiscussed part in multiple existing subjects can be the solution to these problems? Good day everyone, my name is Tirsha and together with my groupmates, we will be presenting on why sex education should become an individual subject in school.
Good afternoon, Madam K and fellow friends. Today, my group will be presenting on the topic, why should sex education become an individual subject in schools? My name is Raisa Jade and I will be your first presenter. Before we go into today's topic, I believe we have learned a thing or two about our reproductive system and its functions way back in high school, but it only touches on the biological aspects. It does not talk in depth about your hormones or what you are supposed to do when you have reached puberty. So, this is where sex education plays an important role. Now, what exactly is sex education? Now, according to Planned Parenthood 2020, sex education is a quality teaching and learning about a broad variety of topics that are related to sex and sexuality, as well as to explore your beliefs and values in order for you to navigate the skills acquired in related to your own sexual health. Now, the next definition is by Brunner and Madsen 2016. They said that sexuality education is more than the instruction of children and adolescents on anatomy and the physiology of biological sex and reproduction. It covers healthy sexual development, gender identity, interpersonal relationships, affection, sexual development, intimacy, and body image for all adolescents. Now, let's take a look at a brief history of sex education. From the late 19th century, there were a number of sex education publications produced with the aim in helping parents to enlighten their children regarding their body. Moving on to World War II, as per the Chamberlain-Khan Act, which was introduced in 1918, the Congress at that time allocated money to educate soldiers about syphilis and gonorrhea because there was an increased number of cases of sexually transmitted infections. So, Chamberlain-Khan Act is actually a public health program which was introduced in order to combat STIs as well as STDs among soldiers. Moving on to the 1950s and the 1960s. The lessons at that time about reproductive systems were focusing more on the reproductive system of animals and plants, such as the reproductive systems of a rabbit, as well as the pollination of flowering plants. Sex education at that time was seen as teaching about reproduction. Hence, it is integrated or adopted into the biology lessons. Moving on to the 1970s, sex education during this time began to change as biology textbooks provide a detailed explanation regarding the human reproductive systems. And not only that, methods of contraception were taught widely. But the issues with relationships were discussed more in personal as well as social education. Moving on to the 1980s, sex education programs focus on the acquisition skills for decision making, communicating, personal relationships, parenting, as well as coping strategies. It also focuses on giving accurate information. However, students were given less opportunity to discuss about their sexual feelings as well as their relationships. Sex education program during this time talk about allowing young people to think for themselves as well as making their own decisions regarding their own sexuality. So, we can see that there's a difference on sex education during the 1950s as well as during the 1980s. During the 1950s, students only learn about reproductive systems of animals and flowering plants. But during the 1980s, they learn about the reproductive systems of humans as well as it talks more about their own sexuality. Moving on, HIV and AIDS. HIV and AIDS became a health issue in UK, and at the same time, sex education became a political football, which brings me to my next point. In both UK and US, national politics had extreme influence when it comes to sex education because they find sex education as corruptive. However, in Netherlands, sex education remained a non-political ground. Moving on to the recent and current school sex education. Recent school sex education programs have changed their aims significantly. Abstinence education was introduced in order to prevent people or societies from engaging sexual intercourse before marriage. The present UK government has also introduced a more inclusive approach when it comes to sex education. Next, we will look at the types of sex education programs. There are two. First is comprehensive sexuality education, and the next one is abstinence only until marriage. We will take a look at comprehensive sexuality education. Comprehensive sexuality education is a program that starts in early childhood and continues throughout high school. It teaches that sexuality is a natural, normal part of healthy living. It talks about topics such as relationships, sexual expression, as well as culture. It also includes information on sexually transmitted infection as well as HIV. It also emphasizes on the strategies in reducing the risk of unwanted pregnancy. Next is the Abstinence Only Until Marriage program. Abstinence Only Until Marriage program emphasizes abstinence from all sexual behaviors, and it does not cover topics such as contraceptives, sexually transmitted infections, and etc. However, it teaches that sexual expression outside of marriage can have harmful psychological, social, and physical consequences. This program also do not cover controversial topics such as abortion. That's all for my part. Now I will pass it to the second presenter. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum and a very good day to Dr. Khadijah, our beloved lecturer, and to my fellow classmates. I am Nurul Ain Shafiqah, and I will be continuing to another subtopic. So, as discussed by my friends earlier, they have mentioned about the introduction of sex education, and don't you think that sex education is an interesting topic? So today, I will be continuing on another subtopic, which is sex education already inculcated in Malaysia curriculum syllabus? Yes, indeed, there is in fact a sex education program and it has been covered in the curriculum syllabus in Malaysia. But, however, it is not being covered holistically and it is only focusing on the surface level. So the proposal on having a structured, a well-planned based sex education among the Malaysian teenagers has been opposed by the Ministry of Education on 1st May of 2010. And it is being taught officially in the Malaysian schools since 2011. The program is known as the Reproductive and Social Health Education, or in a short form, it is known as PEERS. PEERS was part of the health education curriculum for all levels, from preschools to secondary schools. Alright, so the PEERS component comprises of 75% of the health education curriculum, followed by healthy eating of 15% and first aid of 10%. So the PEERS syllabus teaches primary school students important information such as a good touch and a bad touch, helping them to differentiate between the two. So, physical education health textbooks for Form 5, students on the other hand encourage them to abstain from sex altogether. Next, the Ministry of Education introduced some subjects related to sexuality and reproductive health, such as Islamic studies, health and physical education, moral education, science and biology for primary and secondary schools. So sexuality education has been introduced indirectly to Malaysian secondary school and primary school in 1989 to 1994 consecutively. Conversely, it was not taught as independent subject, but would be absorbed in existing subjects such as science and biology. So they just absorb whatever that they have into the syllabus. And as mentioned earlier, the syllabus is not being covered holistically. And according to the NEO project, it is the Malaysia-based youth-led group. They mentioned that sex education is or should be a holistic subject that includes teachings about the physiological, emotional, psychological aspects of sex, because this is very crucial so that the students can learn more in depth on the particular subject. I did some reading on Talib's article, and according to him, based on the teachers' perspectives, 53.6% of the teachers explained that the content of sexual information from the books are already enough for the students to understand the issue. However, 58.2% of them stated that the information given in the book is not enough and is not fully covered on all of the important aspects that the student should learn. So these are the 3 examples taken from the textbooks of physical health education for Form 2. And as you can see from the first picture, they are just giving the definitions of sexual harassment and sexual abuse. It is merely touching on the sexual content and teaching the students on the surface level, whereas the students should be learning more than that. According to a 2011 study on sex education by Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia, which compared the PEERS syllabus to the UNESCO Comprehensive Sexuality Education Guidelines, 90% of the respondents agreed that sex education has not been taught in Malaysian schools, although it is said that it is on the syllabus. However, they feel like it's not, because to them, the topics covered are very vague and they felt like they are not learning anything, because they are learning like very basic stuff and they do not realize that what they are learning is actually related to sex education, because it is like too basic. For example, in structuring a sexuality education program, it is very important to cover all of these elements, such as information of the negative effects of HIV, AIDS, STD, STI, intercourse, reproduction, birth control, and highly risk sexual behavior. If these things are not being mentioned in their textbook, It is useless because they will not know the negative effects. If they are being taught, only then the students will be able to differentiate and know how to take care of themselves better. Don't you think? Sexual education being taught vaguely in the classroom are based on two factors, namely the subject matter being incomplete or the ineffective teaching methods. With regards to the subject matter, respondents felt that besides being incomplete, it was shallow, lack of depth, and insufficient. The emotional and psychological aspects of sex are equally important as the physical aspect, and so it should be given equal importance when teaching about it in the classroom. And according to Talib et al. 2012, the study concluded that while around 85% of the respondents had received sex-related education, however, it was lack of clarity and it was so vague that it simply failed to serve as a source of guidance for the students. So these are the answers given by the respondents from Talib's research. So the first respondent said that sex education was not taught, but introduction of sex organs were taught in science and biology classes. And since I went to co-ed school where they were boys and girls, thus what is taught with regards to sex were not in depth. In my opinion, it is not sufficient as a guide to the students. While the second respondent said that the style of presentation and explanation by the teachers were not clear because the words used were not understandable, and the teachers made no effort to explain the meanings of the words used. Indeed, we found the information received were inadequate. So, teachers do play an important role in conveying the message. If the students fail to understand the message that you are trying to convey, hence it is impractical. Next, moving on to the teachers' reluctance. The students claim that the teachers were not enthusiastic to deliver the right message to the students. Teachers play an important role in delivering the message. Let's say, although it is being implemented holistically, and let's say that there is a core subject on sex education, but the teachers fail to cooperate in delivering the subject matter. Hence, it will be useless and it will fail miserably from the sole purpose of teaching the subject in schools. The reason to why students felt like the teachers were not enthusiastic because most of the teachers were ashamed to explain that they had to use methods such as analogy, metaphors in educating the students. Hence, learning process could not take place due to lack of understanding of the topic. Like, you use a lot of metaphors, like even in literature, it's hard for the students to understand what more in sex education. So, the question here is whether all the students from various backgrounds culturally and ethnically understood those colloquial. It simply failed to serve as a source of guidance for the students. So, in conclusion of my subtopic, yes, of course sex education is being implemented in our current curriculum syllabus. But, however, it is not enough and it is insufficient. In my opinion, it should be covered holistically in order for it to be a successful learning. Between the years of 2006 to 2009, around 234,000 illegitimate infants were born from illegal relationships. Imagine the number of cases now in 2020. Think about it.
Hello and good day everyone. So I just had my shower, I just had my hair blown dry, and I am now ready to get out of this place and find a good spot for me to have a good read on the issues of sexual education. I might take a few moments, but be right back.
it's softly spoken, with no strings tying you to me. I'm happy in your company with no emotion, 'cause my love deserves to be free. I never wanna look at a house in the garden, I never wanna lock you down. I know you're not mine, it's just my turn, but we can still have fun for now.
Hello everyone, so I just got back from Tea Life. I had a very good time doing my extensive reading on the issues surrounding the implementation of sexual education in school. So bear in mind that some of the issues are similar to the issues that have been presented by the previous presenters last week. But also bear in mind that we are presenting the issues now in a different perspective. We are presenting it based on the argument that it has to be implemented as an individual subject. So that is the focus of this week's presentation, to make it as an individual subject. Okay? So without further ado, let's proceed to 2016. And after that, it is going to be presented in a chronological order until 2020. In 2016, YB Teo Ni Ching stated that sex education should be taught to preschool students, and that means students aging from 4 years old to 6 years old. She quoted a statement from a gynecology in Hospital Melaka saying that 3 cases of sexual abuse related to children is recorded every day. Yes, every day. And 50 pregnancy cases involving teenagers is recorded every day. And that sums up to 18,000 pregnancy cases every year. And she stated that sex education is not a taboo, but rather as a protection for children. In 2017, Syed Saddiq retweeted that sex education should be taught in a holistic way. He was calling for the implementation of sex education for all people and for all aspects. So, because of this, he was accused of promoting casual sex or sex outside of marriage. This justification is very clear. Baby dumping cases is on the rise, and HIV cases in Malaysia is among the highest in Asia. Asia being the highest and being the biggest continent in the world, and we are among the countries who has the highest number of HIV cases, and that is very, very serious, and we need to look into this matter very seriously. And going deeper into HIV cases in Malaysia are not mainly transmitted through the sharing of syringe among drug addicts, but rather through sex. And when it comes to sex, we're not only talking about casual sex or sex outside of marriage, and not just rape. We are talking about marriage. Legally married people also transmit HIV to their children really seriously. The first opposing opinion is that religious education is enough to curb all these sexual issues. Religious education. Secondly, this method is too liberal. So, I'm going to project my own opinion on this. So religious education, I personally believe that religion is already complete, and religion is good, and it teaches us to stay away from all the bad things, and that includes bad things or bad behaviors related to sex. But I also believe that religion allows us to be wise and to use wisdom, and that means to outsource from scientific facts and data to actually live in accordance to what religions call us to live for, and I believe that applies to sex education too. Religion should not restrict us from using scientific data and knowledge to actually improve ourselves. And the other way around, I actually believe religion empowers the urge and the move to implement sex education as a very important matter in this country, actually. And when it comes to people saying the method is too liberal, in my understanding, they are saying that this method is very Western. And yes, it can be debated and can be discussed in a more deeper way, but simply saying that this is too liberal is not a good point to begin. YB Hannah Yaw was appointed as the Deputy Minister in the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development, and she suggested that sex education to be taught to children as early as 4 years old. And it was the aspiration of the government, the then ruling government, to actually implement sex education as an individual subject. So they already have the plan to implement it. So among the things that should be included in sex education for children, as said by Hannah Yeoh, first is safe touch and bad touch, and second is about private parts, because we Malaysians are very conservative. We don't name our private parts the way it should be named. For example, we say kuku ciao instead of penis, and we say curry pop instead of vagina. I mean, sorry if I have to use the examples, but this is just for education purposes, so I think it is safe for me to use the examples, right? But the thing that I want to highlight in this issue, in this argument, is that we need to address things and to address important issues as it is, so that children need to be educated to say and to pronounce their private parts the way as it is. Because if they were to be harassed or being touched by somebody who is not who is having a bad intention and having want to take advantage over them, they can just shout, and the public can actually take the alarm or the issue seriously. Imagine a child shouting, "Someone touches my kuku chow, someone touches my curry pop." But can you imagine the level of seriousness that will be shown by the public to that? And compare it to when you say, "Help me! Someone touched my penis. Someone touches my vagina," and that can actually trigger a more serious response from the public. And that is why sex education for children is very important. In 2019, are you ready for a bitter truth? As stated by Nurulain Shafiqah just now, the PIRS subject, or the sexual education, has been embedded in pendidikan kesehatan since 2011, which make up of 75% of pendidikan kesehatan. But according to Professor Datuk Nur Azia, the syllabus that we have now is not enough to actually impact the society and impact the generation as a whole. It is not effective and it is not achieving its goal. According to data that I have presented earlier, baby dumping issue is still on the rise. HIV cases, sexual abuse among children, pregnancy issues among teenagers, and sex outside of marriage. And no, this thing is not being solved yet, and in fact it is still happening in a very unreasonable number, unreasonable increase of numbers. So that shows that there is a discrepancy in the existing sex education syllabus, and that needs to change. Therefore, as a group who is presenting about sexual education this week, we are calling for sex education to be implemented as an individual. In 2020, Dr. Ana Yasmin Azmi revealed that 3,900 cases of child and teenagers pregnancy happen among children and teenagers ranging from 10 years old to 19 years old. 10 years old children. When I was 10, I was a happy kid. I was playing around, I was discovering new things, learning about new things. I was socializing with my friends, with my neighbors and all that. I had the fun being a kid. I had the fun being a primary 4 boy. Now imagine these children being pregnant at the age of 10. First, being, carrying a child in their womb as early as 10 years old, and imagine the perception of the society. Acceptance by family members, acceptance by the society. And how are they going to face that? And most importantly, how are they going to become a mother as early as 10 years old? Imagine yourself being a 10-year-old boy or girl, having to become a father or mother. How is that making sense to you? And according to Dr. Ana Yasmin, sex education should be given an equal importance as other subjects in the syllabus. And moreover, she stated that instead of implementing sex education according to the Western way, which is more permissive, we should implement it in an Islamic perspective. And I have to agree with this, because when you want to implement sex education, you have to make it a complement to the existing norm and to the existing knowledge, to the existing culture. And because predominantly this is a country that is mostly populated by Muslims, and most of the population, they adhere to the lifestyle of the Asian people. Therefore, sex education has to be adjusted and has to be implemented in a way that it complements the existing culture in this country, and I have to agree with that. To conclude my points, we are now living in 2020, and what we have now is not Wawasan 2020 coming into reality, but instead we are having this country caught up in a dreadlock of political coups and issues. Politicians are fighting about who's going to become the Prime Minister. At the same time, baby dumping cases, HIV cases, early pregnancy cases, sexual abuse, child abuse, all those are still on the rise. And it seems that the implementation of sex education as an individual subject in schools is still far beyond reach. But nevertheless, we are going to continue with the presentation because we have more interesting facts for you.
Hi, Assalamualaikum and greetings everyone. My name is Nur Atira Natasha and I will be covering two subtopics for this issue, which are sex education in the Western countries, as well as the implementation of sex education as a subject in Malaysia. And we will look into this matter by asking the WH questions. So let's begin. Okay, we'll start with the first question, which is why. Why it is taught in the Western countries? The main reason is to curb pregnancies and address public health concerns such as teen pregnancies and STDs. There are also believed that teenagers are or will be sexually active, hence the relevance of this subject. Why? Why sex education should be implemented in Malaysia? Okay, yes, the topic is already embedded in some of the subjects in our syllabus. However, according to a study, it is not explained and explored in detail. The existing content is insufficient and quite vague for some teenagers to fully understand topics. Okay, my second point would be it also acts as a guidance and early exposure to the teenagers. In my opinion, it would have been best if they are exposed to this topic from educational point of view rather than discovering it on their own from the internet or even from their friends. Okay, second question is how it is implemented in the Western countries. Okay, it is taught in a more comprehensive approach. However, majority of the states allow parents to remove or option out their child from any sexually related education. Some states require affirmative parental consent for the child to take any sexual education classes or even participate in the school-based health clinic services. Yes, this subject is still not accepted by them all. How sex education should be implemented in Malaysia? Okay, it should be taught in a detailed and straightforward manner. No more beating under the bush that can leave the students clueless at some point. Secondly, it should be taught hand in hand with respective of religions. Other than that, in order to achieve a safe environment for discussion, the students should be separated by gender. Same goes to the teachers, meaning that female teachers should be teaching the girls. My next point is their parents need to be acknowledged once certain topics are taught in class. This is to ensure that the parents know how to tackle them if they were asking any further questions at home. Lastly, instead of sex education, it should be taught as comprehensive sex education. Teaching abstinence alone would not be sufficient. Okay, moving on to the third question, which is what? What are the content? Okay, the first one is abstinence, the act of not doing something, especially when that something gives you pleasure. Okay, second one is HIV, AIDS, and other STD related information. Okay, these are known as the sexually transmitted diseases. Okay, the third one is reproduction, including the description of the male and female genitalia. And the fourth one is contraception, including the description of the proper use of the contraceptive techniques. Okay, the fifth point is pregnancy and the financial responsibilities of raising a child. Okay, as you can see here, this is a tweet from a Malaysian girl who went to the USA when she was just 12 years old. She was sharing her first-hand experience learning sex education, and she said that their teacher gave them a salary to make the monthly budget if they have a child. Okay, and then she remembered saying that they had to buy frozen vegetables instead of the real ones to cut costs. Okay, moving on, the sixth point is adoption, and lastly, sexual orientation. Okay, this is about describing your pattern of emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction. What is the most relevant way for this topic to be implemented in the Malaysian syllabus? Yes, it should be taught as an individual subject with no major examination. We can treat this subject like how we treat pendidikan jasmani dan kesihatan. When it is being taught to the teenagers in the Western countries. Okay, it is introduced as they reach puberty, normally at the age of 11 to 12 years old, with permissions of guardians. However, in some schools, they started at 7th to 12th grade, and some even started as early as 4th grade. When is the most appropriate age for the youngsters to learn about this topic? As a group, we have agreed that the most appropriate age would be starting from 5 to 6 years old. Yes, in preschool, we can start small by teaching them about safety. Like for example, teach them to scream if anyone is trying to touch their private parts. And then we can move on to bigger topics such as pregnancies and the financial responsibilities of raising a child in primary school, and maybe about STDs in primary school. And then in secondary school, I can teach them about contraceptions and as such. Okay, next question is who? Who has been teaching them? Most families rely on teachers as they supported the idea of teaching sex education in schools to some extent, but there is disagreement among the topics that should be covered. On the other hand, opponents argue that parents should have a say on what is being taught to their children. Especially when it comes to certain topics that are sensitive and something that can contradict a family's own moral or religious values. Therefore, in this case, the parents are in charge. Who? Who should be teaching this subject in Malaysia? Well, yes, teachers, of course. Teachers who are graduates from the sex education program, which is still in existence at the moment. However, our best options for now are the PJK teachers or maybe the counselors with the help of the Ustad and Ustazah as well as the moral teachers. Not to forget the parents. According to Gilfera Luke, it is a both-way responsibility. Where it has been taught in the Western countries, some believe that it was best left to the parents, therefore the learning takes place at home. In contrast, some believe that public schools are a proper venue for sex education to take. Finally, the last question. Okay, the question is where? Where should the students learn about this topic? In my opinion, first, exposure by teachers at school. Second, continuum at home with parents. So that will be all from me. Thank you for watching. And now I would like to call my friend. He's not answering his phone. He was supposed to present after me.
Yes, Tira. So you want me to explain on the benefits of sex education being implemented as an individual subject at the school, right? Yes, sure. I can do that. Okay, Tira. But before that, let me share two facts extracted from an article by UNESCO. Based on the article, only 34% of young people around the world can demonstrate accurately about HIV prevention and also transmission. Can you imagine it? The other 66% of human population, among the young people, still do not know about HIV prevention and also the transmission. This is why the young people need to be exposed. They need to learn, they need to know about sex education starting from their early age. Implementing sex education as an individual subject at the school is very beneficial for the students, as they can have access to the information regarding, like, for example, HIV prevention and also the transmission. In some countries, 2 out of 3 girls do not know what is happening to their body when they begin menstruating. Based on the fact, there are a lot of girls and also the young people who have no access to information about menstruation and also HIV. It is important for the young people to have knowledge about their own body and know about the prevention of sexual diseases such as HIV. As adult learners, I believe we all know that sex education does not include any sex position in the syllabus. So there is nothing dirty about sex education. Now I would like to discuss about the benefits of sex education being implemented as an individual subject at the school. I'll get in deep into the benefits of sex education being implemented as an individual subject based on a research conducted in Iran, since we are sharing the same perspective regarding sex education as Muslim countries. According to the research finding, sex education is able to increase knowledge among young people. Bear in mind that the purpose of sex education is not to encourage sex-related activities among young people. Sex education helps to provide appropriate view regarding sexual issue among teenagers. As human, we need to understand sexual and reproductive health. We need to understand our body. Then only we can take care of ourselves. If we were all well equipped with sex education, we can have a better view about sexuality among our society and even a better lifestyle. Next, sex education promotes the normalization of sexual and reproductive issues. Menstruation for the first time could be embarrassing for some girls. If only we all understand the situation as a natural phenomenon, this kind of situation can be avoided. Don't you all think that sexuality should be accepted as a reality? Sexuality is not an issue. It is part of life. We need to change the perception of sexual issue as a taboo. Now, imagine if everyone could speak openly about sex. I can only imagine how interesting the world would be. As for the third benefit, sex education can help to increase self-efficacy among the students. Adults know how to reject unwanted sexual act. But what about the youngsters? I mean the younger generation. I'm talking about the ones around the age of 7 to 12, as in Malaysian context, the primary school students. At that age, they do not know much about inappropriate sexual act or gestures. The children of that age need to learn that up to certain age, when they already understand things, this and that, nobody should have the privilege to touch them on certain part of their body. It is appropriate for sex education to be implemented as an individual subject in an open manner. The subject would be very helpful to shape our society differently in a good way. However, some people say that sex education initiates sexual behavior and taint their modesty. According to the research finding, this group belongs to the ones who never received sex education. They misunderstood the subject as a reason for the young people to get involved in unhealthy sexual act. They need to understand that the purpose of sex education is to educate people about appropriate information regarding sex and reproductive health. If they were exposed to the knowledge about the importance of sex education, this group might have different perception regarding sexual and reproductive issues. Actually, it is quite unfortunate for them to have no access to sex education. They could have known a lot about sexual issues and have a better perception about sexuality. As I have explained earlier, sex education should not be taken lightly, especially among the primary school students. Nowadays, the students are getting more advanced with the existence of smartphones. They have unlimited access to online information. The student might also learn wrong sexual knowledge from the internet. Well, that is the reason why the young generation need to be provided with the appropriate resource to learn about sexuality. Sex education needs to be implemented as an individual subject to cater the young student with sufficient sexuality knowledge, as the subject can be considered as important these days. As a conclusion, it is very beneficial for sex education to be implemented as an individual subject. Like I said just now, it can increase knowledge and also self-efficacy among the young people. Sexual and reproductive issues can be normalized instead of being considered as a taboo in our society. I think if issues regarding sexuality can be normalized, sex education can be accepted by the society as an important subject. From my slide, the disadvantages of sex education being implemented as an individual subject were based on the perception of people who never learned the subject. Their statements were very different compared to the real sex education content, the syllabus. Obviously, they did not know much about the issues, regarding sexuality and reproductive health. We should not think of sex education as a license to avoid abstinence. I hope my explanation can help you to understand better about the benefits of sex education being implemented as an individual subject. We all deserve the knowledge as a person. Let's not neglect the subject and look into the bright side of it. That's all for the benefits. Thank you for listening. Now I would like to have Miss Tricia Avril to continue on her subtopic.
In the span of 2 days, we managed to get 215 responses for our mini survey. We received responses from parents, teachers, university students, secondary school students, as well as others. And others are comprised of married couples with no children, unmarried individuals, working individuals, as well as the unemployed. We included 6 questions in the mini survey, ranging from open-ended questions to asking for opinions. Have you ever heard of sex education? 59.5% of people answered yes, and 40.5% answered no. Take a look at the breakdown of people who answered no. Isn't it eye-opening that there are still people, especially adults, who have never heard of sex education? Teachers even. And mind you that this is just from 215 respondents. Question 2. Do you know that sex education has already been embedded indirectly in the school syllabus? 65.6% said yes, and 34.4% said no. As mentioned before, sex education is taught in minor parts in multiple existing subjects in schools, such as science and pendidikan kesehatan. And I believe the respondents have gone through at least 11 years of schooling. So why did they answer no? It brings me to drawing 2 conclusions as to why there are still people who have no idea about the embedment of sex education in the school syllabus. 1. They couldn't even care less about what they were learning in school, so they didn't even realize that they were actually exposed to sex education before. And 2. The topic was skipped. It was left untaught and it was left undiscussed. In an article titled "It's High Time We Take Sex Education Seriously" by Hazlina Aziz, she states that, "I spent 11 years studying at all-girls schools with the last 5 at a boarding school. It was hardly a topic discussed openly with the teachers, not even during biology lessons." She adds, "Educators experience a lot of anxiety and tension when faced with teaching young people about these issues, and this tension can result in avoiding or not effectively addressing sex education." And in relation to the previous survey question, these situations can be the very reason as to why there are still people who have never heard of sex education. Question 3. Do you agree with the suggestion of teaching sex education as early as in preschool? The responses are almost 50-50. If you look at the data, there are more disagrees from parents and students. Let's see what they have to say about this. Here are some of the responses from people who agreed to the suggestion. Most of them stated good exposure, extra knowledge, and beneficial as their reasons. As for those who disagreed, almost all the responses stated too early as the ultimate reason. I'm sure to some it seems extreme. When we think of talking to kids about sex, we feel like we're going to somehow rob them of their purity or innocence, or that it's encouraging them to be sexual, but that's not the case. In an article titled Why We Need Sex Ed in Public Schools Starting in Kindergarten, it states that we need sexual education in public schools because children as young as 5 deserve to know about body parts. While kindergartners don't need to learn about sex, STDs, or condoms, they do need to understand basic anatomy so that they can reach out to adults for help. The concern, especially parents, it's understandable. They just want to protect their child from having sex-related discussions so early in life. But the truth is, it's never too early to talk to kids about sex education. Think of sexuality as a broad topic that is more than just intercourse. It actually includes things like the importance of privacy and knowing the appropriate terms for body parts. So it's never too early actually. With that being said, I'd like to share a popular saying for everyone to ponder on. Sex education as an individual subject taught in school. Do you agree? 60.9% of people chose agree, 26.5% of people chose disagree, and 12.6% of people chose not sure. While analyzing the data, there are respondents who disagree with the idea of sex education being introduced in preschool and suggested that it should either be introduced in primary or secondary school instead. My point is, they're not entirely against the idea of sex education, it's just that they think it should start later and not in preschool. I chose one response that literally includes and summarizes all the other agreeing responses from the survey. I personally think that sex education is a need. It can actually protect a child and to a certain extent saves lives. Those who disagreed stated that it's the parents' duty to talk to their child about sex. But what about parents who shy away from the topic? These kids will eventually resort to unreliable sources and may learn the wrong things instead. Based on public opinion, it can be agreed that the voice of majority are for the idea of implementing sex education as an individual subject. To read the rest of the public opinion, click on the link in the description box down below. That's all from me. Thank you.
As a conclusion, we believe that there is a necessity in implementing sex education as an individual subject in schools. With the advancement of technology, students nowadays mature very quickly. So, with subjects such as sex education, it will teach them on what is right and what is wrong, as well as it teaches them about their own body as well as their sexuality. Based on the survey conducted, majority, which includes parents, teachers, as well as society, agreed of the importance of sex education. So, that is all from our group. Thank you for listening.